Basically what, like two parts of this job, the constituency side and the legislative side. Why don't you talk a little bit about the similarities of the constituency side to the work that you've been doing for the last 2 decades?
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, throughout my practice, I've worked with individuals who have had huge challenges with the BC government, and you get to know how to approach the BC government. You listen and you figure out what the issue is, but because of my legal background, you also can figure out what the solution is, and you can figure out the art of the possible, and then you take it up with the government, and if you really put your mind to it and put your elbow into it, you get the result, and the individual's individual issue is really dealt with effectively.
What about the legislative side? Because this is not something that just anybody can step in and figure out. Writing legislation, reading legislation, being able to dig into an amending bill, for an example, which is amending another piece of legislation somewhere else, or an act somewhere else.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your experience on legislation.
Yeah, well, when I was first getting going, I was asked to draft BC's Freedom of Information legislation and worked with a team to get that done.
What year was that?
And that would be back in 1991. And then when I went into
we just gutted that one, by the way. Just in case.
I know. I
mean, the NDP just gutted it.
I think there are a bunch of ministers that'd be losing sleep over that, the current NDP government. You know, because you know they all talked about openness and fees shouldn't be a barrier to access, and then so much talk, but then they just gutted it. Yeah. The word I use actually is they eviscerated it. But the legislative experience that I had that is most helpful for this job of MLA is that I spent years drafting all of a First Nations treaty legislation. Financial Administration Act, Election Act, Conflict of Interest Act, Land Management Act, Resources Act. So that experience gave me a real insight into both how to get legislation right, and when you see something that is hidden in the legislation, you can find it because you've got that experience. And so when you're holding the government to account and they're introducing an omnibus bill, my experience is helpful because I can go through that bill fairly quickly, figure out where they've hidden stuff, and also figure out what they've missed. And that's where it's so crucial to have an MLA for the Greens in the legislature to play that role. Adam's done a great job, and that's something I'm equipped to do because you know you don't get a second chance to get it right, and you can actually go after the government, and you know if they don't make the amendment, they're going to be held to account because they're going to live with the consequences.
You know the key differences between you and I, you going into this job, you have that awareness. When I was going in, I had to learn it. And I think that there's going to be a lot of MLAs in this coming parliament that are going to be learning, which means Saanich North and the Islands is going to have an experienced person sitting there looking out for our interests, but also looking out for the interests of British Columbia in a way that their colleagues, that his colleagues, are not going to be able to do necessarily. So vote Rob Botterell in Saanich North and the Islands.